Today we are going to discuss some of the subject matter found in James chapter 5. And like all of the subject matter that we have been discussing in this study, this is definitely a meaty subject. We are going to talk about when James discusses hoarding treasure. You know, Carl, I will just be honest that when I read through that and as I was writing the study, it was something that just really spoke to me, but not just spoke and encouraged. It was something that just convicted me to my bone, because so many times we just do not realize that we are hoarding treasure. And it was almost like God started to pinpoint, areas of my life where I had been holding on to things that I could be giving to people in need, and that is so convicting. And yet, that's what God calls us to do, is to look after, the widows, those in distress. James has already told us that, or maybe it's this chapter. Once you've studied it as much as we have, it all kind of starts to blend together. But what are your thoughts about hoarding treasure and what James had to say in this chapter?
Well, I think we don't realize how blessed we are. We have so many things that we've become accustomed to, that we've grown used to, that we think they're just necessities, when they're far from necessities. When you think about people across the world and just needs to stay alive and to stay fed and to stay protected each day. So we're awful lucky. And I think you raised a good point. When you think about, just say your home, for example, when you think about the things in your closet, maybe it's the clothing, when you think about the things in your kid's toy box, when you think about the money in your wallet, there is so much excess that if we thought about parting with it and doing away with it, it could be used to good for someone who has so little.
Recently, and I think that this James study really hit home for me, but it was almost like God was preparing my heart for this lesson that he was going to teach me, because I read Radical by David Platt. That was one that really talked about looking at the American dream and how culture has made us think that we need, and that if we are really disciples of Christ, we're not caught up in that materialistic cycle. We are instead are always looking to give. And there were several things that I have been reading in the last maybe year and a half that has just been convicting me and drawing me closer and closer to the point where I do more and I do a little more. And one thing that I know that will be different from here on out for the ministry, for Response to Grace, is as reading through this, I felt like God was telling me to keep a little bit in our account, because we always need it for production, and when we have to print off more studies to be sending out, shipping. We have some expenses. We pay for the website and things, and God gave me a specific amount and said, this is the amount that is okay to have in there. Anything above this amount is mine, and I want you to give it. And so after writing this study and God really speaking to my heart about hoarding treasure, at least with this money that Response to Grace has been given, we found needs, and we wrote checks, and we gave out money to people who needed it, and that will just be the case, from here on out. And I'll share that with you, because once you say it, you're going to be held accountable, and in more ways than just saying, I'm going to, Lord. Other people know, and you are welcome to ask me in a month from now what kind of money is in our account.
Right.
But that's one thing where, I hadn't even really thought about that. It was just that somebody would buy a study and I would put the check in the account. I'm not ever using that money in there for my personal gain. It was just in the ministry account, and there it's set. And God said to me, what are you doing with that money? And I said, Lord, I'm hoarding. I'm so sorry.
Absolutely.
And so we don't realize sometimes, that we are in the places that we could be giving more.
No, you can't take it with you. That's the
Absolutely.
simple modern day way of thinking of it, right? Moths and rust will destroy. You're not taking any of that with you to heaven. So if we're keeping it to be conservative and to be safe, I think God wants us to plan, accordingly. But to fill those storehouses to overflowing, I don't think that's the intention when there's people right next door that have a need.
Or even if we're not filling the storehouses, if we're using the excess that we have to increase our standard of living. I saw a recent post on a friend of mine's webpage. Susan Lawrence is a writer, and she has a Bible study called Pure Purpose, and she has a fan page on Facebook that's titled Pure Purpose, and she's just always putting great posts out there that encourage and challenge people. And I believe it was her page the other day, and she asked the question, as your income increases, every year people are usually getting an increase of some kind. And she asked, as your income increases, are you increasing your standard of living, or are you increasing your giving? Mm-hmm. Because you've gone that whole year living on X amount of money. And then the boss says, you've done a great job, here's a 3% raise. What do you do with that? Do you use it to further God's kingdom, or do you say, let's get a new car? Mm-hmm. Or we can go on a really good vacation, or let's get all new flat screen TVs to hang on the wall this time instead of just on the, the console. So a lot of times there are so many areas that we could really be evaluating, but we just live and don't really think about what God's calling us to do. And that is to spread the gospel and to look after the people that his heart is for, and that's for people who are poor and without, and sometimes we just turn a blind eye and we don't even realize that we're doing it.
Yeah, when you think about what we're commanded to do, to care for the widows and the orphans and the poor, and then you think about all the upgrades we make in our lives, and most of all of us do it, and whether it's the flat screen or the iPhone or,
Absolutely.
Whatever the upgrade is that we think we need to have, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. It's right out of Matthew. And wherever we're sinking that money, that kind of shows our heart. Absolutely. It shows what's important to us.
Yeah, ouch.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty convicting.
Yes, it is. It is. So what do you think are some practical, hopefully we're all feeling convicted about this segment in James. It's asking us, what are you doing with what I've given you? Because he basically says it's mine. Mm-hmm. I've given it to you. I've blessed you with it. What are you doing with it? I know you mentioned looking through the house. One simple thing that our participants can do is look through, where do you have extra that you could be sharing with somebody else? Maybe you don't have the money to go out and buy for somebody, but you can look through your own materialistic things and say, do I have stuff in my wardrobe that I'm not really wearing, or I only wear occasionally, that's in good condition, that they could use at the homeless shelter, mm-hmm. or they could use at a women's shelter, or I know a family and they wear the same size as my children's clothing, and how many pair of jeans does one kid need?
Right.
Look through that. Pots, pans, dishes. There are people in need in our communities, and we just have to take the time to look for them. Any other ideas? What can you think of?
Well, when you think about, a simple monetary donation, think about mm-hmm. the things that again, you've grown accustomed to because they're just part of your daily routine or your weekly routine. And maybe it's stopping for that morning cup of coffee.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's the going out to eat, a couple times a week, whether it's, at home or during your work day or whatever it is. But if you just stop and think, boy, I'm treating myself without even realizing I'm treating myself, maybe take that $3 or take that $6 and just start there. Just say every week I'm going to give up, that mm-hmm. cup of coffee. I'm going to give up that meal out. Right. Whatever it is, start somewhere, and you'll realize that you're not going to miss it. But that $3 or $5 or $10 a week can make a huge
Absolutely.
Impact for the family that doesn't have anything.
Absolutely. If we were crafty, we could make jars of some kind that said Hoarding Treasure on it and put it on our dresser. And after it gets to a certain amount, give it to a cause of some kind.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe we don't have jars. The ministry doesn't have jars to hand out to people. But that is something that you can do at home. Find a place. And like Carl said, start to collect small amounts here and there where we are living in extravagance. Mm-hmm. That's what it talked about in the study book, that when we compare ourselves among ourselves, it doesn't really look like we're living very extravagant lives. But when we start comparing ourselves with our brothers and sisters around the world, mm-hmm. at some of those persecuted churches that we looked at earlier, we are living high on the hog.
Absolutely.
And that money can go to them. You can find a good organization that is continually helping our brothers and sisters in other nations, or you can find somebody in your backyard.
Yep.
That needs it.
You think about tithing, and if you're doing that at church, fantastic. You're doing what you should be doing with regards to that local community that you're attending. But there's so many other ways you can do God's work and fulfill God's purposes by helping others through the local food pantries and all the outreaches, mm-hmm. like you said, across the world. Start local if your heart is local.
Right.
There's so many chances to do it right in your own community, and we don't even realize our people's next door that have needs.
Mm-hmm. I have to throw in another ouch, because I heard you bring it up, and then we'll close because they might be turning us off if we don't. But I heard you say tithing. And I think a lot of times as Christians, we get that mindset, but I gave my tithe. And that is what's required of me. And that is true. That's all that God has actually set in stone and said, this is what I require. Mm-hmm. But oh my goodness, He blesses us so much when we go above and beyond.
Absolutely.
Because of our love for him, because of his love for us and what he's done for us. And we just say, you know what, I want to give more than what's required of me, because I want my life to be one of those lives that people can tell that grace has made a difference.
And again, put it back in the eternal perspective, right? Small benefits while we're here on this earth for a blink of an eye, the luxuries and the things that make us so comfortable. But think about the jewels. I mean, think about the treasures in heaven that you're storing up for eternity, when we really spend our wealth and our riches where they should be.
Absolutely. All right. Well, again, we're sorry if the material that we're discussing just continues to step on our toes. Mine are bruised at this point.
Mine are bloody.
Yeah. But we thank you so much for studying with us, and we just pray that through it all, God is speaking to your heart and just growing you in your walk with him, because it's all about spiritual maturity, and that is where he is leading us, every single one of us.
Thank you, James, for the conviction,
Absolutely.
for the teachings.
Absolutely.